Folding away clothes has become a ritual of Chris Little's life, and not just because of his two young daughters.
This is the fifth house I've lived in this area in the last 10 years. Laundry and access to the garage.
The 49-year-old rents in Melbourne's southeast and has never been able to afford to buy a home.
We just never got out of renting, never able to save enough, have enough deposit and get to that stage.
More and more Australians are finding themselves stuck in a similar cycle. Census data shows across the country the proportion of renters has grown over the past decade in every age group except those aged 80 and over. And figures from the Australian Housing Conditions data set reveal 45% of renters don't believe they'll ever be able to buy a home.
Australia really is in this kind of tipping point of transition, from a home-owning nation to a nation where renting needs to be, a lifetime tenure.
Researchers from the Australian Housing and Urban Research Institute asked almost 1,000 renters what protections they were willing to pay for. They found the average tenant will fork out $127 extra each month for their property to be maintained above minimum standards, $72 for an indefinite lease, and $77 to ensure rent prices cannot increase by more than 5% a year.
People would trade off some extra costs for being able to be a bit more secure in their rental. It lets us hone in on what renters actually value. So it just gives us this little insight into what people think is important.
Chris says he'd be willing to pay for protections.
I'd probably rent forever if I knew that I could stay in that house. That was my rent, like my mortgage, and I paid that for the rest of my life. That would be okay as long as I knew that was essentially my home where I'm going to stay and be.
As the number of lifelong renters grows, experts warn the trend could leave many without the security of home ownership and retirement, putting new pressures on Australia's retirement system.
We need to think about rentals being something that is much a longer term prospect for many families, and having policies that are suitable for that situation where people will be renting potentially for many, many years.
Part of that might also be increasing superannuation or welfare payments later in life to help those that don't manage outright home ownership by the time they retire.
Sort of delay bill payments and things like that.
Retirement is a milestone Chris isn't too far from reaching, and he's weighing up pulling money from his super to buy a property.
I'd have a lot less to retire on, but on the other hand, I'd have somewhere to live.
Hoping one day he'll finally unpack for good.